Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ocean Harvest Technology Group PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so, and these will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. Before we begin, if I may, I would like to submit the following poll, and if you could give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company would be most grateful. And I'd now like to hand you over to CEO Mark Williams. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're very pleased to be presenting to you, and we think we have a very compelling proposition to share with you. Ocean Harvest Technology is transforming the business of animal feed and the way production animals are fed. And today we're going to show you that by using our seaweed ingredient, that we are able to materially improve the metrics of producing animals, and by doing so, improve the sustainability of their production. Let me first introduce the members of our team. I come from my immediate history is from a similar background. I was in insect protein, working with an organism called the black soldier fly, which was being produced for an alternative and sustainable source of protein. That's fairly well developed in global business and involved us having operations in around the world, in California, Africa, and Europe. The opportunity to come to Ocean Harvest Technology was an exciting one for me, because whilst it's in the same area of developing improvements and sustainability benefits in the food chain, it's one that I certainly believe can be grown more quickly and more profitably. And certainly, the numbers we've printed today demonstrate that. Haddon?
Good afternoon. My name's Haddon Graham. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer. I've been with the company for just over 2 years. Just over 30 years ago, I was an academic who had the opportunity to take one of my research projects into a startup. I stayed there 15 years. That startup is still active. I then left and went into another startup in the same area, both in the animal feed additive business. And I stayed there a further 15 years. Those two companies are number one, number two in what is the feed enzyme business globally, worth over $1 billion a year at the minute. So I've been and done this twice in startups in the feed additive area, and I joined Ocean Harvest because it was an opportunity to again change the feed industry.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Adrian Crockett. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Ocean Harvest Technology. I've also been the CFO of 2 AIM-listed companies, helping them grow from single to double-digit revenues. I've also been involved in equity raises, significant equity raises, and also in M&A. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to go through the presentation. I think our pictures are going to disappear so you can see the screen bigger during this, but don't worry, we will come back for the Q&A. You've heard a lot about the sustainability of the food chain and what improvements need to be made for it. And a lot of the media coverage in particular around that has focused on plant-based alternatives. But as you can see on this slide, the reality is that the consumption of animal protein is still significant, and it's still growing very quickly, and particularly with the growing affluence in developing countries. So really, the solution has to involve how do we produce animal protein more efficiently, and sustainably. And this slide summarizes the key issues in trying to do that. So the sustainability points, again, I think in the media coverage around improving the sustainability of the food chain often centers around methane emissions and greenhouse gases, and that is an important element of it. But actually, the animals are such significant consumers of feed that anything that improves the feed efficiency or reduces the amount of feed take that the animal needs clearly has a big impact on its footprint. The aspects of human health are important in producing this. So a lot of animals had traditionally been fed with chemical or synthetic additives, and in particular antibiotics. And whilst these are very effective at keeping the animal healthy, we now know that it's not ideal for the the humans who are the end consumers of that protein, particularly with the observation of antibiotic resistance. So the feed companies are looking for more natural additives to go into their feeds. Animal welfare is an issue that is important and has come to the fore, particularly with consumers and retailers, because that is the right thing to be focusing on with animals. But also, a healthy animal is a more efficient and a more productive animal, so in turn improves its sustainability footprint. And finally, on the right, an issue that's come to the fore in the last 12 months is the impact that the war in Ukraine has had on some of the core ingredient prices, such as grains, wheat, barley, soy, etc. They have all clearly risen significantly, and that's had an impact on our customers, those companies that produce animal feed. So those customers are looking for ways to make their feed more efficient and to find some lower cost additives to go in, ingredients to go into the feed. So how do we at Ocean Harvest Technology help solve these problems? Our company's been around for well over 10 years. We've got global operations, we've got existing sales, and we've got over 40 people coming to work every day to address these problems. The company's business is based on the research, commercialization, and development of the research which was done, which demonstrates that the polysaccharides and other bioactive compounds contained in the various sources, species of seaweed that we use, have a prebiotic effect on animals. So these molecules get into the right area of the digestive system to encourage the production of good bacteria, and that essentially leads to more efficient nutrient absorption. So we've then got many years worth of research and development, which has shown us and demonstrated to our customer base that by having this prebiotic effect, we see multiple other benefits in the animal as well. So the seaweed ingredient is included at an inclusion ratio of around 0.25% in the total feed. And when included at those ratios, we see improvements in mortality in the animals. We've got evidence of higher growth rates. Some of our customers use it as a replacement for antibiotics in their diets. We see improvements in what's called the feed conversion ratios, i.e., the animal is more efficient at absorbing feed. You need to feed it less to get to the same growth rate. The R&D process is not finished. We're still continuing to work on it, and we've seen a number of benefits as well in the work we've done, which we're now putting through a series of trials to demonstrate to customers as well. So we have trials which will be giving new results over the coming months and years to demonstrate things like toxin binding, antimicrobial properties. We've even got some data which demonstrates methane reduction abilities in ruminants, and also some specific species do suffer from diseases, and we've got research ongoing to demonstrate that our product can help the animals in those challenge environments. It's this information that our customers rely on when buying our product. If I give you an example, one of our larger customers is a poultry producer in North America. When they first trialed our product, they trialed a group of animals on their traditional feed and then a group of animals on the traditional feed with our seaweed ingredient included. They saw a material reduction in mortality from over 8% to under 4% of their population. And they saw a 4% live weight growth, which meant one flock was weighing 4% more than the other, and an 8% improvement in feed efficiency. So there is therefore less, they need to feed the animals 8% less to get the same result. Clearly, with those benefits, there are financial benefits to our customer because that all flows through to the bottom line, but it also improves the sustainability of the animal's footprint. Another large customer of ours in North America is a swine feed producer. They trialed our product initially as an antibiotic replacement. Antibiotics are very effective, particularly in piglets, because they're at a vulnerable stage when they're young. And antibiotics are a good way of giving them defenses and to allow them to continue to grow in those early years, in those early weeks. Again, the customer trialed the product with their traditional antibiotic ingredient, And then they trialed the animals with their feed minus antibiotics with our seaweed ingredient. And they observed the same growth rates through that crucial piglet phase. So it was an effective antibiotic replacement. In addition to that, the customer also saw these material reduction in mortality by 40%. And that combined with the feed efficiency improvement meant that the producers were making a 27% improvement in margin per piglet during that critical phase. So there's lots of opportunities in this market. As Haddon said, he's done this twice before in the animal feed space. So I think he's best placed to now take over and talk you through the opportunity in the animal feed market and the progress that Ocean Harvest has been making there.
Thank you, Mark. As Mark says, I've been working in this market for the last 30 years. It is an enormous market. It's over 1 billion tons of feed every year with a value of somewhere around $500 billion. And it is truly global. Every country in the world has essentially animal production and has animal feed production. And the growth rate is somewhere around 3 to 4% a year. It fairly well follows GDP growth across the world. Feeds are normally made up of 60 to 70% of a cereal, normally corn or wheat. It's got 25-30% of protein, normally soybean meal, also rapeseed, sunflower. And it has around 2.5% of additives. Those additives represent 2.5% of the feed, and our additive, seaweed, represent 10% of that additive. So somewhere around 0.25% of the feed would be seaweed. That would be included in the diet for the animal. These companies are large companies. The biggest one, if they use seaweed right across their operations, be worth somewhere around $100 million to us. And there's probably 100 companies. There are 100 companies worth more than $1 million if they were to use our seaweed in their production every year. So this is a large market with a large number of customers, quite fragmented market. The market is also fragmented not just by customers, but by region and also by animal species, with poultry and swine being the two bigger species, but ruminants, pets, equine, and aquaculture also significant. If we look at the seaweed market on the left-hand side of this slide, it's somewhat smaller. It's estimated to be somewhere around $17 billion a year. That's probably somewhere around 1 million tons dry matter coming out of the sea. That is literally a drop in the ocean. Today, we use less than 1% of that seaweed in the animal feed industry, and we have penetrated less than 1% of the potential use in animal feed. So there is raw material there, and there is a potential market there to grow into. In terms of what the product does, Mark introduced this quickly. The fibers in the seaweed get into the gut. They encourage the growth of the positive or the good bacteria and decrease the bad bacteria. As a result of that, you get a more healthy gut. You get less health problems, less mortalities in the animal. You also get better feed efficiency, which is very important, both from the point of view of the farmer, because it reduces his cost, and feed will represent somewhere around 75 to 80% of the variable cost of animal production is the cost of the feed. So reducing his feed cost by 1, 2, 3% has a very big effect on the profitability for the farmer. But it also has a big effect on the sustainability, because the feed will also represent somewhere between 50 and 80% of the carbon footprint of the animal is down to the amount of feed that it eats. So in terms of sustainability and profitability, seaweed offers an opportunity for improvement to the animal producer. If we go on to Ocean Harvest's role within this market and our customers, we'll run through 4 slides just to give you a background on what customers we have today and how we work with those customers. As Mark hinted, we have over 30 trials, the majority of which were run by customers who shared the data with us proving that our product will improve the gut health, will improve animal performance, and will give a return on investment to the producer somewhere in the region of 5 to 1. This has resulted in growth of sales over the last few years. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, you can see that this is in tons per quarter. We have grown the business over the last 5 years, quarter on quarter, essentially. I think Adrian and Mark will mention later, we had some hiccup in the middle with COVID. It's very difficult to sell to customers if you can't meet them, but also the cost of shipping become a very significant cost for us and our customers. So we had a bit of a drop back maybe around 2020, pushing into 21, but we've come through that and we're pushing ahead now with increased sales. And as I said earlier, those sales are into the major species: poultry, swine, aquaculture, pet, ruminants, and equine. And ruminants are bovine, that's mainly dairy cows. So if we look how we're going to grow this business, there are two ways we're going to grow this business. Number one, existing customers. Number two, through new customers. Existing customers are quite sticky. We haven't lost a customer yet that takes over 100 tons. Mark mentioned the North American swine producer. He tested in piglets and baby pigs a few years ago and has been using now for more than 2 years, bringing in more than around €400,000 to us. Baby piglets represent 8% of his feed production. He's currently testing in the sows, that's the mother pigs. If that's a successful trial, that will almost triple his offtake. And if he was to use right across the board in all his feeds, and there's no reason why he shouldn't do that, then of course that would increase his offtake by 12-fold. So that's consistent with what I think almost all our customers. They start in one species. And then they move to another species as they become comfortable with the product and become comfortable with Ocean Harvest as a trustworthy supplier in this market. We're also now targeting quite a lot of new customers. Last year, we brought in 18 new customers. They represented over 20% of our turnover. Most of those are back-end loaded, so those customers will get a full year this year, which will also contribute to growth. But this year, we expect to also bring in around or over 20% of our revenues will come from new customers. And to do that, we're currently running 15 trials, again, across a number of species and across a number of countries. And those trials are paid for to a large extent by our customers who share the data with us, and the customers are running and paying for those trials with the hope the trials are positive and the understanding that if they are positive, they will use our seaweed in their animal feeds going forward. So to get a customer to onboard and to get them to run trials is actually quite a long process. It takes somewhere around, let's say, 9 to 18 months. The first thing is you have to build customer relationships. We've shortcutted that in some way by, over the last 18 months, we've recruited a sales team of 6 people. So we now have sales representatives in the Americas, in Europe, Asia. Those guys between them have over 100 years sales experience. So they know these customers and they have relationships and trust with these customers. To get the customer to use your product and get it to fit into his schedule, that normally takes 2 to 3 months. A trial takes somewhere between 5 weeks as a chicken trial up to around 9 months with some fish trials. At the end of the trial, you evaluate the data, that takes around a month. So it takes somewhere between 9 and 18 months to onboard a customer. That's both good and bad. It's bad that it takes a long time, but it's good in that your competitors, if they're going to replace you, also must go through this cycle and they must outcompete you. And as I said, that hasn't happened yet. But also it allows our operations people to plan for the future, and they know when a customer is coming on, usually 3 to 6 months ahead, we can ensure that we have adequate supply for those customers coming in. So if I'd finish off with just a quick summary. Within the animal feed industry, there are synthetic additives, that's antibiotics, things like zinc oxide chemicals. Those are on their way out. In Europe, for example, we have legislated against them. In many other parts of the world, there is both consumer and retail pressure to reduce the amount of antibiotics, for example, in feed. An example of this in the US, there is no legislation against the use of antibiotics, but over 50% of chicken meat is produced without antibiotics. So the producers, when they take out antibiotics, face a problem in terms of gut health and in terms of animal mortality and profitability. And so they're looking for new solutions. There are a number of solutions out there, mostly land-based plants or extracts of land-based plants and things like yeast. They have been used for a number of years. They have not been terribly successful. And in our experience, when we work with customers, they remove, one customer in Spain recently removed up to 7 of these additives and replaced it with our seaweed, and they found improved performance and better profitability. So I see seaweed as a more effective and more sustainable solution to the problems that producers are facing at the minute in terms of reducing antibiotics and zinc oxide in their diets. Thank you.
Thanks, Haddon. Right, I will take you through the supply chain, and it's a global supply chain, and it's not straightforward to develop. It's something that's been built up by the company in its over 10 years of operations. The seaweed we source is from around the world, and quite often that is in areas where there is poor infrastructure development, and sort of not a lot of other things are straightforward in those markets. So they're developing market supply chains. They've got to deal with making sure we get the seaweed out at the right cost to the right quality, and they have to deal with variability. A lot of the blooms that we deal with are seasonal, so the different species that we get are available at different times of the year, but we are producing on a daily basis through the year, so the supply chain has to be have enough redundancy in it to deal with that. On the quality issues, there are impurities in seaweed, and some of those we can deal with in the processing, such as sand, moisture, plastics, for example. But seaweeds are also absorbers of sort of, I guess, non-visible impurities, and they are, and particularly some species are absorbers of heavy metals, depending on where they've grown, and also some species, particularly the browns, are inherently high in things like arsenic and iodine, and a lot of those are regulated to the amount of inclusion that they can have in the animal feed space. So our supply chain has been dealt to deal with this. We source red, green, and brown seaweeds. The red and the green seaweeds we source are what we call wild bloomers, and they grow in warmer waters. So for these, we've built supply chains across countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and recently also in Eastern Africa. We work with local communities and local suppliers in those markets, because quite often those communities are coastal. They will have activities such as fishing, and a lot of them will also cultivate some of the higher value seaweeds that Haddon mentioned initially. The majority of the global seaweed industry at the moment is coming out of the water for application in things like pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and food, which are higher value applications. There's not a lot going out into the animal feed sector. But we identified to them that, look, you've got these blooms of seaweeds off your coast or in your waterways that you could harvest as an additional sort of source of income for your communities. So we work with our local suppliers to do some investment like boats or drying racks in those areas. We don't have contracts with these people, and to be honest, given the nature of their subsistence existence, a contract probably isn't of a huge amount of value to them. What is valuable to these communities is that our supplier or representative comes out every afternoon or every second day and collects the biomass and pays them for the biomass, so long as they've collected it to our quality standards. And it's that consistency and reliability that has built some very strong relationships in our supply chain and has allowed us to grow with adding on of different communities and suppliers in different regions in these countries. The brown seaweed's quite different. They're attached to the seabed, and they're grown in colder waters. So we source those from North Atlantic countries, and they are sort of corporate suppliers really, because they harvest them and process them typically under a permit from the local fisheries department. All of the seaweed collection processes that we do are sustainable. And it goes to the point that this is a genuinely sustainable business, and we're not greenwashing this by any means. Haddon's talked about some of the benefits to the animal and the food chain from eating the seaweed, but by the very nature of sourcing the seaweed, we also have additional sustainability benefits. So, as I said, the reds and the greens that we harvest are wild blooms. They're often considered invasive. There's a lot of academic research, both from people associated with our business and not associated with our business, where it's widely accepted that a lot of these are at volumes which are problematic. Seaweed grows on nutrients that are in the sea, and with the increase in human activity, in particular agriculture, means there are more nutrients in the sea. So if uncollected, these what were called green tides of particularly green seaweeds, if they're not collected, they will sit on a beach and rot, or they'll go to the bottom of the sea and they'll rot. And in doing so, they'll re-release all of the carbon, phosphates, nitrates that they've absorbed during their growth period. So by our collectors taking these out of the sea and putting them into the food chain and back onto the land, we are effectively bringing these nutrients which have washed off the sea into the ocean, putting them back into the food chain, as opposed to having them release into their local environment. So it captures carbon and nutrients on the way out. Also, a lot of the ingredients that seaweed is replacing in animal feed are now from land-based plants. And those plants would be grown specifically for the use in animal feed. So in doing so, they would be using arable land, fresh water, and fertilizers. And seaweeds use none of those. So it is a genuinely sustainable practice and doing good through their harvesting. On this slide here is some examples of some of the local communities that we work with. I think these ones here are in the Philippines and Indonesia. As I said, these communities often have multiple economic activities, and so we are bringing to them additional activity which allows them to increase their revenues. Some of these communities we brought on very quickly. For example, the ones at the bottom there, from a particular region in Southeast Asia that we weren't working with probably 6 months ago, and between November and March, we identified them, worked with a local supplier, invested in some of the infrastructure that you can see there, trained them up to our processes, so they're now sending us multiple containers a month of that seaweed to our facility. And in doing so, we've had a material impact on the economic prosperity of those communities. All of the seaweed that we source is shipped to our facility in Vietnam. This is a picture of it just outside Ho Chi Minh City. The processes we do there are two, really. Firstly is quality control, and secondly is the manufacturing of the finished product. The quality control, we are audited to GMP Plus and HACCP standards, which is required from our feed customers' perspective. We test all the seaweed on the way in, and then we test all the finished product on the way out, dealing with any of those impurities. The processing itself has been happening on that site for a number of years, so we've got very good knowledge on how to handle seaweed as a material, to I guess grind it up and then blend it into different recipes for different species of animals, and then put that into a finished product format that our customers require. Some of them have it as pellets, some of it has it as a meal, some of them take it as a crumble, but we work with our customers so we can send them a product which goes into their systems and their own processes for manufacturing the animal feed that ours are included as an ingredient in. We typically ship to customers by the container load from Vietnam. We have processing capacity there for, I'd say, up to over 12 million euros worth of finished goods sales. So that will see us good for a few years, certainly past our break-even point. We did a small increase in capacity last year. We've still got room to put a little bit more capacity, but that site itself will definitely see us good for a couple more years of processing capacity. So to this point, a lot of people ask, well, what are the barriers to entry? Why are other people not doing this? I mean, Ocean Harvest Technology is the only producer of a dry blended seaweed ingredient of any commercial scale that we're aware of or we see. Our customers are not being sold a competing blended seaweed ingredient by anyone. And when we go to all the animal feed fairs or whatever the exhibitions are that we attend with hundreds of stands there, we are the only one selling this product. So we have got a jump on the competition. There are three key areas of barriers to entry, which we set out on this slide. The intellectual property of the business, that is also multifaceted. We have got patent applications in place which are based on the research that this company has done to demonstrate the impact that our seaweed blends has in the microbiome of the animal, has in the gut of the animal. So that is work that the company has done, and the patent application is around the mode of action as to, as Haddon said, the encouragement of the production of the good bacteria to improve nutrient efficiency. But arguably more importantly is the fact that we've got over 30 trials which demonstrate the impact that our seaweed ingredient has in animals when included in the feed. And anyone else who's going to want to try and sell a seaweed blended ingredient is going to have to demonstrate to the nutritionists at the customers that their product does something, and they're probably going to have to demonstrate that it does more than us in order to replace us. So the amount of money, which is into the tens of euros that the company has spent, tens of millions of euros, sorry, that the company has spent conducting this R&D, very much forms part of the intellectual property portfolio of the business. Haddon's talked you through the customer traction of and the process it takes to win a customer. He's probably being a bit modest. When he joined the business 2 years ago, I would say there was probably one customer who was actively trialing the product with a view to taking it on. As he says, there's now over 15. Those customers are all spending their own time and money and resource to trial our product in their systems on the basis of the results that they've seen from our data. And our experience is if they see the same results in their system, which we would expect them to do, they'll be onboarded as a customer. So it gives us a lot of visibility over new customer acquisition, helps us with forecasting and certainly inventory planning as well. And that's going to take someone else a number of years to replicate and do as well. Finally, the seaweed supply chain, I've just been talking about that. It's not straightforward. It takes time to build up. It takes trust in the system with suppliers to build up. And this company has been doing that for upwards of 10 years. On our team, Haddon, Adrian and I have introduced ourselves just quickly on the rest of the team. So we have this global sales team down here who Haddon has talked you through. We've also got a number of people obviously involved in the operations, technical and R&D. What I would say on the R&D is, whilst we've got the in-house direction and management and capability on that, most of our R&D is conducted externally. We work with the right research partner to do the specific type of R&D that we're doing. It takes a very different type of R&D to do a trial of the product in ruminants, for example, to what it does to do specific seaweed related analysis. So we work with the right external partners. We direct the protocols. We pay for it. We own the data, and we own the intellectual property that comes from those trials. On the board, obviously, Haddon, Adrian, and I are on that, plus 4 non-executive directors. The 2 on the left have been involved with the business for some time. Ashley Head, our chairman, is probably known to a number of you as an active entrepreneur and venture capitalist. His first big real monetization was when he vended his business into Data Cash, which he then sold to MasterCard for about £300 million 10 or so years ago. Tom Onions is an active investor and advisor to growth businesses. Actually, he and his wife founded and now run the Daisy Green chain of restaurants in London, which I believe has gone from £5 to £25 million in turnover. So we've got a lot of support there on people growing businesses at a fast rate like we are. Professor Christine Maggs is one of the leading phycologists globally, phycology being the study of seaweed. She's very actively published. She's the editor of one of the global leading publication on this. She was recently the chief scientist for the UK government on the JNCC. So she's got lots of experience to come with seaweed, helps us with credibility in that, and also in helping us expand our supply and the different seaweeds that we work with. David Tilston has been on a number of AIM-listed boards before. He's on in Silica and SDI at the moment. He's chairman of their audit committees, and he's doing the same for us. So I now hand over to Adrian to take you through some numbers.
Thanks, Mark. So what this is, what this chart's trying to show is the strong growth that we've seen month on month and year on year, despite the headwinds that hadn't touched upon of COVID, of soaring shipping costs, significant increases in shipping costs, and the general economy. Despite all that, we showed a 30% year-on-year, 3-year compound annual growth rate from 20 to 22. The next slide on the income statement, what this is just is a little bit more detail of what I was just discussing, and just to lay the picture, we beat analyst forecasts this year with our revenue, and it showed in flat revenue 49% revenue growth year on year, but on our product revenue, and I'll discuss what that means in a second, we had nearly a 70% product revenue growth. Our product revenue is just on our pure product. We do have some revenue. It's really a pass-through cost from shipping, so we'll get some revenue from our shipping, and there will be some costs to that. And part of that shipping caused our customers some issues during the COVID period, sort of late 20 and 21, where shipping costs went, for example, from $5,000 a container to over $20,000 a container. So we offered some concessions to our larger customers to help them cope with that increase in shipping costs. Some of that was we would cover part of their shipping costs, and some of that was free product. So that did have an impact on our margin between 20 and 21. 22, we started to unwind that around sort of November, December of that financial year. And in this financial year, we've completely unwound that. And we're seeing our margins getting up to the mid to high 30s again. We do have good visibility of our orders, and we've got significant order book already filled for this year. January, February, and March have been good and in line, certainly, with our forecasts.
Great. Just before we conclude, I've talked quite a lot about the animal feed opportunity. We've explained it's a very significant market, very big growth potential for this product and this ingredient. And so we're unashamedly really focused on expanding that and getting the maximum commercial traction that we can in that over the next few years. And that's what our business plan and that's what this money that we recently raised in the IPO is going to be continued to spend to do. We do know, however, there are multiple other applications that seaweed can be used for. And we think that being a well-capitalized, publicly listed company will continue to give us access or enhanced access to some of those opportunities in the future. We know, for example, that seaweed does have a positive benefit in human applications as well. The company did run a project to orientate some of its supply chain into a food grade standard, which it had done. We put that on ice while we continue to focus on the animal feed opportunity, but that's something that we could certainly reignite. We also know that there is an opportunity in the soil conditioner or fertilizer market. We actually do sell some of our product into this market already, but it's a very high volume market. So someone who's going to prosecute that with a real opportunity needs to have access to a significant supply chain. And as I've explained, the company has that. So there are opportunities for big expansions to the business model outside the animal feed sector in due course. So in summary, Ocean Harvest Technology is well, certainly now the only listed supplier of seaweed-based ingredients in animal feed. We think we're the largest and only sort of one of any commercial scale globally. So that position of market leadership, we believe, is based on a number of barriers to entry, which will see us continue that leadership position for some time. And that includes the intellectual property portfolio, the customer acquisition process, and the supply chain. We are a genuinely sustainable and socially responsible business. It's the basis on which our supply chains work and that our customers are increasingly looking at when they buy our product. So there's multiple benefits for that. And that combined with the robust commercial prospects makes us as a management team very confident about the prospects for the future. We've been very pleased with our response from the IPO and bringing on some new shareholders. We've continued to see that since listing, with a number of new shareholders coming on board as well, which is great. And we look forward to continue expanding that and hopefully having some of you on the journey with us as well. So I think that concludes the presentation. I might hand over to IMC to put us back on the screen, and then we can take some of your questions.
Mark, Haddon, Adrian, absolutely, and thank you very much indeed for your presentation this afternoon. If I may, I will just bring back up your cameras there now. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab that's situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those questions that were submitted already, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. Guys, as you can see there in the Q&A tab, we have received a number of questions throughout your presentation this afternoon, and thank you to all of those on the call for taking the time to submit their questions. Mark, perhaps if I may hand back to you to chair the Q&A session with the team, and then I'll pick up from you at the end. Thank you.
Sure. Right, so there's a question here. It's asking us to talk a bit about our direct competition and the barriers to entry and how we intend to scale from here. Maybe I'll take a couple of components of that and then hand over to you, Haddon. I think just generally with competition, we've said, there is no other real producer of any scale of dry seaweed blended ingredients. But whenever the sales team is going to look to sell our product to potential customers, we've got to demonstrate a return on investment to that customer. So how much are they paying to put our ingredient in? Less how much are they saving from taking other ingredients out? Plus what's the benefit that they see from having our ingredient in the product? And that's got to result in a return on investment materially greater than one, quite often so 3, 4, 5 to 1 plus to get a customer to purchase. So that's how we deal with competition. The barriers to entry, and look, I went through a slide on that. There are multiple barriers to entry to this. I just mentioned the intellectual property, yes, includes patent applications, but also significantly the data that we've got, which demonstrates what our product does in commercial and scientifically standard trials, which is hugely important for customers. They won't buy it unless they see that data. The customer acquisition cycle and the supply chain. Haddon, I know you talked about it in the presentation, but why don't you comment specifically about some of the ingredients that we compete against when selling our product?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, as I said, many producers have been growing animals without antibiotics for a decade now at least, and they use a number of products, some yeast and yeast derived products, and some plant derived extracts can be phytochemicals or indeed other types of fibers. These haven't been terribly successful. They have helped, but the producers know that they're still having problems and they're still searching for solutions, hence the number of customers who are willing to put the effort in to test our products, and hence the growth of our business over the last few years.
This question then went on to say, how do you intend to scale? The company has grown materially, as Adrian pointed out, a product revenue of nearly 70% growth last year. The company's been investing in the sales cycle, so putting the team in place to build the relationships, to get people understanding the data and running their own trials. That takes time and investment. The R&D investment the company's had to demonstrate the applications of our product, as well as the demonstration of new applications of our product. And then we've been investing in the supply chain, to grow that in line with our sales growth, but also to give it some robust and strength around it, so we can further enhance it and potentially use it for other applications by having access to the seaweed. So our scaling up strategy involves continuing to do all three of the same, investing in the sales and marketing, the R&D, and the supply chain. There's a question here on how we're finding winning new customers, and do you see being a listed company will make this process quicker? Hadden, maybe you comment on the traction you've had and your team have had in getting new customers on board, certainly in the 2+ years you've been here.
Yeah, I think that people are becoming more aware of seaweed and becoming more aware of ocean harvest over the last 2 years. When I joined 2 years ago, went to meet customers, they were sort of what and who, and now they're seaweed, ocean harvest. Okay, let's talk. So yeah, I think it's moving quicker. I think that we talk about the sales cycle, but actually in the last 6 months or so, we've had 1 or 2 decent sized, medium to large size businesses that have taken on our product without actually testing. So we move forward. You need to build your business. You need to build your profile. You need to build a reputation for delivering. And once you have that, then this becomes a bit easier.
There's a related question there. Are there any steps you can take to reduce the time that it takes to onboard new customers?
I think, again, as I said, once you have more and more data, and once customers know that their neighbor down the road is using your product, and they will know these things get out, then it becomes much quicker.
Okay. There's an IP related question saying, are you finding any challenges when you apply for patents against your IP? As I said, our intellectual property is multifaceted. There are patent applications which we've described today and they're set out in the admission document. They run its course. No particular challenges on that at the moment. But the IP also, as I said, includes the data from over 30 trials, which demonstrates the product effectiveness in multiple species and in multiple jurisdictions. To be honest, some of the customers like to see the trial data in their own region. But also having worked with the material and trialed different seaweed species, knowing which ones have what components and which ones don't, which ones have issues with heavy metals, for example, and which ones don't. All of that forms part of our intellectual property, and we own that. We keep that confidential. And then similarly, just the processing and turning it into a product, into a format that the customers want, all forms part of that as well. So it's multifaceted. Yes, we have some patent applications. Yes, we have R&D data, but there's a lot of know-how that's been built up in the business, which we consider part of our valuable intellectual property process portfolio. Do any of the directors own shares in the business? Yes, both Hadden and I put money into the business pre-IPO and the last pre-IPO fundraising. I put more money into the IPO at the IPO price recently. So I put £100,000 in pre-IPO, another £50,000 into the IPO. And there's an option plan that us and others are also participating in, so we can benefit from align our interests with those of shareholders, which again are explained in the admission document and sort of, well, they tie us in for at least 2 years before we can monetize any of that, but we've got targets we need to meet. Can you demonstrate any efficacy in reduction of methane in bovines, Hadden? Do you want to take that?
Okay. Whoever asked the question may well know there is some information around seaweed and Asparagopsis in particular, which is grown mainly in places like Australia. We have in vitro or laboratory evidence that in the test tube our product will reduce methane by around 20%. We have indirect predictive data from animal trials that our products will reduce methane by somewhere up to 20%, and now we're commissioning direct in vivo or live animal trials to measure the effect of our product on methane. The first of those trials started a couple of months ago. They take quite a long time to run. Methane trials are not only long, but actually enormously expensive. So they cost around 100 to 150,000 euro a shot. So, but we've been very lucky that we've got into a trial or been invited to participate in a trial sponsored by a major UK food retailer, and that trial started about a month ago. So yes, we are testing what effect our product will have on methane production.
But certainly we were somewhat waiting for some of these IPO proceeds to come through, because for us to be able to say anything definitively to customers, we need to have done this with credible institutions on both sides of the Atlantic. So we're in the process of commissioning and doing that. So it's probably a 2024 news event as opposed to a 2023 news event. Right, I can't see any more questions in there, so...
Mark absolutely had, and Adrian as well. Thank you very much indeed for being so generous of your time there and addressing all of those questions that came in from investors this afternoon. And of course, if there are any further questions that do come through, we'll make these available to you immediately after the presentation has ended, just for you to review, to then add any additional responses where it's appropriate to do so, and we'll publish all those responses out on the Investor Meet Company platform. But Mark, perhaps before just redirecting those on the call to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to yourself and the company, if I could please just ask you for a few closing comments to wrap up with, that would be great.
Yeah, so Ocean Harvest Technology has got an ingredient which we have demonstrated multiple times to really have positive impacts on the economics and the sustainability footprint of producing animals and producing animal protein. They are hugely critical issues for our world, and it is an enormous market which is global in scale. So we think these combine to give a very big opportunity for Ocean Harvest Technology to deliver shareholder value through growth, and we'd be very excited to have a number of you join us with all the other new shareholders we recently got as shareholders. So we hope to see you again.
Mark, that's great. And thank you once again for updating investors this afternoon. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Ocean Harvest Technology Group PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, so good afternoon to you all.